Good evening, and welcome to the first of several events as part of the Confederate Reckoning series hosted by the USA Today Network South region. This is about how we reconcile our past and try to make sense of a complex history while acknowledging the many untold, barely told, or totally erased histories of the people in our community. I'm Milan Ragland Hudgens, Middle Tennessee editor for the USA Today Network in Tennessee.
Good to see you tonight, Melinda. I'm David Plazas. I'm the Opinion and Engagement Editor for the USA Today Network, Tennessee. Franklin, Tennessee is a city south of Nashville where several Civil War battles were fought. It is also the site of the Confederate monument known as CHIP, which was installed in 1899 on the town square. As many communities have fought to protect, remove, or replace these monuments in their own communities, something different happened here.
In 2019, the city installed several markers around CHIP that celebrated Black history. It was the start of an effort called the Fuller Story, which will culminate with the erection of a statue dedicated to a Black regiment in 2021.
This is one reason why Franklin was named one of 10 cities as an All-American City by the National Civil League in 2020 for its efforts to bring people together on a very challenging subject.
And today we welcome the brain trust behind the Fuller Story to tell us how they did it, what they've learned, and how this can be a model for other cities across the nation.
So let's welcome all our guests. We have Eric Jacobson, the Chief Executive Officer of the Battle of Franklin Trust. We have Hewitt Clifton Sawyers, pastor of West Harpeth Primitive Baptist Church. Dr. Chris Williamson, Senior Pastor of Strong Tower Bible Church. And last but not least, we have Kevin Riggs, pastor of Franklin Community Church.
Thank you for joining us, gentlemen. Would you please tell us a little bit about yourselves and how you became involved in this effort?
Well, I guess I'm supposed to start, but this effort kind of came out because of other things that were going on in the country, and it goes back to Charlottesville. After the tragedy in Charlottesville, our own community had a prayer vigil a few days after that, and I was asked to say a few words at the prayer vigil. And we have, of course, our own monument in downtown Franklin. And over the years, Pastor Chris, Pastor Hewitt, and I have been in discussions about, what to do about CHIP. Should anything be done at all? We'd had racial reconciliation services in downtown Franklin and had been doing a lot of things like that over the years. And so I just made a comment that we have our own situation. What happened in other parts of the country could happen here, and it's time to have a conversation about removing our own statue somewhere else and not letting that be the center of our square. And that the press picked up on that. And I had a week of some pretty severe criticisms coming my way. But one good thing that happened was the next morning, Eric Jacobson reached out to me. And up until then, I did not know Eric. Hewitt and Chris and I have a 25-year plus history together and about 75 years experience of pastoring in Franklin. And so we knew each other quite well, but Eric was a new person for me, but he called and said he had heard what I'd said, or he may have been there that night. I'm not sure. And he had some ideas that he had been thinking about how to contextualize our square and contextualize CHIP, and to try to look at another part of the history, a history that hasn't been told yet. And very early in that conversation, I told him that, that sounds like a good idea, but it's really not up to you and me as two white guys to decide this, that it's really, what does the African-American community want to do? And so I gave him Pastor Chris and Pastor Hewitt's name and number and said, call them, talk with them individually, and then let's all get together. And I, on purpose, did not call Chris and Hewitt and say, hey, this guy's going to call you. I really wanted it to be, they would hear it straight from Hewitt without any biases or anything. Or they would hear straight from Eric. And so Eric called them and met with them individually. And then not long after that, we got together as a group. And then I think it was probably in September. The deal in Charlottesville was in August. So I think in September, the three of us as pastors went to the city leaders, the mayor and the city administrator. And we really asked at that meeting if we wanted to remove Chip, what's the legal way to do it? What's the right way to do it? Nobody wants to go and just tear it down. What can we do? And then after they explained the process that you'd have to go through, it was virtually impossible to have it moved. And so then we started talking about what else can we do. And it was decided, well, let's put stuff up. Let's put something up instead of tearing it down. The idea of the markers came about pretty quickly because Eric had been thinking about that for a while. And but then just kind of in a brainstorming session, this idea of a statue to United States Colored Troop came up. And I think all of us thought when we heard that this is a God thing. This is a big deal. If we can get these markers up and get that statue up, then we would be really doing something. And so by that fall, we started, this would have been 2017. So by that fall, we started meeting with the aldermen. We tried to meet with as many groups as we could. We had a meeting with African-American pastors first, and then a meeting with white pastors. And then we met with all the historical groups and societies that are in our country or in our county. Over the course of time, we even reached out to the Sons of the Confederacy to get their input. And at one time, I think we had about 12 or 13 ideas for markers. And we settled on what we had, which was the 5 markers. And then just through a process, the city got on board pretty quick, especially Eric Stuckey, the city administrator, and really helped us guide it through. And so there was some pushback. There was some hurdles we had to clear. But overall, it picked up momentum. And now we're at the stage where all we have left is the statue, and the money's been raised for that. And that's in progress. The artist is working on that statue, and hopefully next June, around Juneteenth, we will have an unveiling of the statue. And for me personally, this has just been really a highlight of anything I've tried to do. I think this is something that will really change the trajectory of the conversation in our city about what's going on and the important part of our history. And it was really, really important for us to tell the African-American story the best that we could. And that was really, really important. And to be honest, early on, I really relied on Pastor Chris and Pastor Hewitt. What do you want to do? What do you think is the right thing to do? And how can we get that done? Because I think that was what was important in this. So anyway, that's my event. I kind of started it by saying some stuff I don't want to say without thinking, because I thought about it a long time, but I said some stuff, and I'm so thankful that Eric reached out to me the next day, and that's really how it started and how I got involved in it.
Thank you, Pastor Kevin. For Pastor Chris and Pastor Hewitt, what were your reactions when you first received that call, and what were some of the obstacles in your mind, and how you might overcome them? Perhaps we start with Pastor Chris and then to Pastor Hewitt.
Well, I didn't know Eric, and so to go and sit in a restaurant with him and talk with him was very interesting. My previous experiences in the city of Franklin with historians and those who led our city in terms of teaching the narrative weren't positive. There was definitely a tilt and a one-sided dimension and a glorification of the Confederacy and a minimizing of the cause, and even getting behind the lost cause in terms of the Civil War. But just a few minutes in talking with Eric, I knew that I was with a different animal, if you will, that he was truly committed to truth and having balance and telling the whole story. And he began to enlighten me as a historian, enlightening a pastor on many of the things that have occurred in our community as it pertains to the Civil War. And so I was stimulated in that conversation, like, wow, I never knew these things. And if I don't know these things, I know that there are many others who probably don't know these things as well. And so that was the beginning. The Bible says, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. And so I began to hear truth about what was going on in our community. And I also want to give a shout out to Tina Callahan Jones, who was also on the ground for many years, uncovering the stories of the USCTs in our community. Upwards of 300 escaped slaves from various regions came to Franklin in order to be authorized and placed into the federal army. So she did a lot of the groundwork. And so we came along at an opportune time to build on top of that and on what Eric had been doing for so many years. And I'm just grateful for his heart, you know, a brother from Minnesota coming in here, not really being received by the folks in the community because, again, he did not continue to play to the good old boy networking system. And he's received a lot of nasty mail over his tenure here. And Kevin, as he mentioned about his earlier comments on the night of the prayer vigil, he and I were there together out there in the rain praying, and he received death threats because of things he said as it pertains to removing the statue. So we've had some interesting experiences over this past, 2.5 years, but to see the progress has been truly encouraging. Not everyone agrees with what we're doing, and we try to tell them we understand. And one of the reasons we can have the vision that we have, which is to be proactive so that we don't have to later be reactive, to put things up rather than trying to tear this statue down, is because this statue is unique in the sense where it is not a specific person like an Alexander Stevens or a Nathan Bedford Forrest, you know, someone that is normally idolized in other communities across the South. This is just a quote unquote generic statue representing the Confederate dead in our community, of which not all of those men who fought for the Confederacy were slave owners or racists. And so we wanted to make sure that when we did what we felt led to do, that it would respect the history that was there, but also telling history that usually does not get told, especially as pertains to the African-American experience before, during, and after the Civil War.
Thank you, Pastor Chris. Pastor Hewitt, what was your experience? We need you to unmute, please.
My experience was very similar to that of Pastor Chris. I'm a little unusual here because most everybody else moved into the area, but I grew up in this area. And so I had a little different slant because in growing up here, I knew a lot of the things that had happened from way, way, way back. And so I had a dual experience because I knew what had happened from a long time ago, because I grew up in the segregated schools. I grew up with the colored and white water fountains and the colored and white bathrooms, going to the back door of the restaurants to get your meals and all of that. So when Eric asked me to come by his office, I had heard about it. I was not down on the square at the prayer visual, but I had a pretty made up mind at the time about what was going on, and I was probably more on the radical side at the time. But being a preacher and a pastor, I knew that God wanted this thing to be handled in a godly way. But the man in me and the history in me kind of was moving me toward the situation that something more radical needed to be done. But when Eric, a white guy from Minnesota, was talking to me about this history, I was really blown away. The proposals that he was bringing up challenged where I stood religiously, and then challenged my understanding of history. And so when I walked out of his office, I had almost changed my mind about the idea that Chip needed to come down. It so engulfed me that this guy from way up there where it snows had so challenged my stance that I could stand firmly and talk about this idea of what was going on in our area, that I was willing now to go to the city leaders and tell them that we needed to approach this thing from a different standpoint. And I was really ready at that time to take a different line when it came down to what our city was all about. So I really appreciate what Eric had opened my eyes to see, and I felt very strongly about it. And so from that point forward, the markers that we have put up, I feel very strongly, was a first step in the education, not only for me, but for our city. Our education about history and about what we feel and what we do not know about each other is a first step to not only changing our city for the good and for a better future, but I believe it will be a light for other cities and towns and counties. That's going to be a really good thing. The things that are going to happen for the future, I think, is going to be not only a blessing for us, but for others who are going to watch us. So I feel strongly about that. And I feel really blessed that Franklin can be that light for some other places.
Thank you, Pastor Hewitt. We do have a question from John Banks. He says he's seen the markers many times on his trips to downtown, and he was wondering if any other communities have reached out to you for advice on what to do with their monuments or how to contextualize the histories of their communities. We'll toss that one to you, Eric. You're on mute.
At this point, no one's reached out to myself or the Battle of Franklin Trust. I don't know if anyone's contacted the pastors or the city. So, you know, we've heard of a few cities that have heard about what we're doing, and I think have considered it, but nothing terribly concrete. And that honestly might be simply because Franklin is a unique place. The monument here is different, not only in the sense that it's not a monument to an individual, but also there was a battle fought here. And other communities just in 2020 have decided that they're going to remove monuments, not offer any contextualization. So it's kind of a long answer, but at this point, there's no other community that's, I think, really tried to do what we're doing and what we will hopefully complete in 2021.
Eric, just to follow up on that, I'd be curious, as after hearing Pastor Kevin, Pastor Chris, and Pastor Hewitt, what did you say to them to persuade them to move in this direction?
What did I say to pastors?
And what kind of history, how did you put it into context?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I mean, I think every conversation was a little different, but there were a lot of similarities. I think I came at it in its simplest form. I think I came at it from two places. I had long believed that the Black experience before, during, and after the Civil War had been virtually ignored, outright covered up, sort of pushed to the sidelines. And for many years, I was aware that there was a market house in the square in which people were bought and sold. I was aware that, there were 180,000 black men who had served in the United States Army and Navy. Franklin had a story that was more than just the Battle of Franklin. So I felt that there was an opportunity in the square to tell some of these things, that there had been a riot after the war, that Reconstruction impacted everyone, North, South, white, black, but there were a lot of positive elements in Reconstruction. There was the chance for the black community to finally, have their seat at the table. The other part was that I did not believe the Confederate monument in Franklin should be removed. Because it wasn't a monument, for example, to Nathan Bedford Forrest or Jefferson Davis. It was a monument to the average Confederate soldier. And whether we like it or not, a lot of these men, most of them relatively poor, if not outright poor, 3/4 of them who didn't own slaves. And yeah, they had all the sort of racial animus that white people all over the United States had. These men were just swept up in a moment. I've said for a long time that a man from Mississippi and a man from Michigan, if they were the right age in 1861, they were going to fight. One was on one side and one was on the other. And so when that monument was put up in 1899, it was meant to commemorate those who had died, Confederate soldiers who died at the Battle of Franklin. So in many ways, it was a memorial not just to the soldiers, but to the dead. And I guess maybe thirdly, is I didn't want to see the chaos that I believed without any doubt would ensue that we had seen in Charlottesville. And the easiest way to avoid that is the most difficult route, which is to sit differing groups of people down at a table and try to figure out a solution rather than just pointing fingers or holding these absolute positions. I've always thought that, Ben Franklin, when asked what his opinion was, he said, well, my opinion is that I don't really have one. And when it came to this, and I certainly had opinions, but I was open to a lot of different ideas. And I think what we learned through the process is some people didn't want anything to change, and then some people just wanted to tear it down. And we felt that neither one of those were very palatable options.
Thank you very much. And I believe there's a question coming in. Malaya, would you mind taking that one again to the panel?
Yes, this one is from William Randall Province, and he's curious about what research has uncovered, if you've uncovered anything about the men from Southern Illinois that joined the Army of Tennessee.
I don't have anything to add. I don't have an answer for it. I mean, our focus in this regard was on a story that was related to Franklin, not the Confederate Army of Tennessee or the U.S. Army. This was really a story about a Confederate monument and then about African American history that we could tell right in the middle of the town square, in a county that at the time the Civil War broke out was half the population was enslaved, in a state where there were 275,000 enslaved people. So that was our focus with the Fuller story.
Thank you. Pastor Chris, I have a question for you. When we talked earlier this week, you talked about this process, the end result being somewhat of a feel-good story, but you didn't want the process to be romanticized. So talk about some of the obstacles that you all faced in making this happen, be it with other challenges from the community, fundraising, or anything else that may have taken you by surprise as you were getting this process off the ground.
Well, as we think about our country, racism is the original sin that was committed against the Native people, first and foremost. European colonizers coming in. And race has been the underlying issue from day one. And when my ancestors arrived here in 1619 in Jamestown, that disease of racism continued to swell and to grow even to this day. So when you start talking about race, racism, personal racism, prejudice, institutional racism, social justice, you are going to create a firestorm. It's a lightning rod of controversy to talk about the Civil War in the South, especially if you have a different viewpoint, if you don't adhere to the states' rights argument on the cause of the Civil War. When I first came into Franklin from Baltimore, Maryland, back in 1993, and had discussions with white Christians, and they held adamantly to the states' rights and position, and they, again, minimized the institution of slavery and how horrific it was. And they just said it was a peculiar institution. As a matter of fact, there were good slave owners, and Black people were fortunate to be able to come here as slaves because they were living better here than in Africa. And they got to hear about white Jesus and these kinds of things. And so when you start talking about this kind of stuff, it goes deep with people, and it causes a lot of division. So we know that everyone is not for us with what we're doing, but the key people who have power in our city and influence, they do agree with what we're doing. And so I'm glad that we didn't sit around and wait for or put a vote out there for everyone. No, we had a conviction in our conscience to do this. And we tried to get as many people exposed to this vision early on. And there were skeptics, there were critics. But again, it is to be expected. And as it picked up momentum and picked up steam, I think some people were able to get on board afterwards. But there are people who will never get on board with this because, as Eric said, there are people who don't want you to touch that plot of land because in their mind, it's holy. Eric, what was that term we talked about? Sacrosanct, where they ascribed holiness to certain events and things. And the city even went into a battle, a legal battle with the Daughters of the Confederacy over who owns that land, because they don't mind a Christmas tree being put up there once a year. They don't mind when other things are put on that square, but they had a big problem when we talked about putting up historical markers that told the truth about the market house where my ancestors were bought and sold like pigs and chickens on that spot, because it tears down the antebellum romantic ideal that they have of that time when we start telling the truth, shining the light on that darkness. And so there are people that don't want it. And then there are people, especially from the Black community, who feel that what we're doing is not extreme enough, that it should come down. And our answer has always been to those people, well, if you want to take it down, then take it down. But don't kick dirt on what we're doing, because what we're doing is going to be edifying. It is going to be something that can bring the community together, at least those who are willing to come together on that land and learn about the North and the South, Blacks and whites, slave and free. But if you want to take it down, take it down. That's your prerogative. But realize that, you're going to have some hurdles to go through. And while you're doing that, we're going to keep doing this, trying to, again, educate and bring people together. And there may be a group in the future who will say, you know what, we do need to move Chip to another location. We need to move him to a better, as a city, we can do better. And that may come from our children, our children's children. But right now, I believe that what we're doing is the right thing, even though everybody doesn't get down with it. But that's fine.
Pastor Kevin,
If I
could
could
you
just
talk a
jump
little
in.
about your, yes, of course.
I was just going to say that in 2017, 18, 19, and 20, what we were doing was that dirty little thing called compromise. We weren't all getting what we wanted. We weren't making, the far fringes happy. We were trying to do what we thought was best for the community, and was also a good way to try and tell a little bit more of the story, thus the genesis of the term, the fuller story. It's not the full story. It's not the whole story. It's just a little bit more more of the story, a fuller story, than just a Confederate monument standing in the middle of a square with no context whatsoever.
And if I might add, one of the things that Eric did say to me early on, and that I've been learning ever since, is that when the Federal Army took control of Franklin and they seized the second courthouse, what is called the second courthouse, and they set up a provost office in the basement of that courthouse that is still standing right there on the square, that is where, again, escaped slaves, they weren't African Americans, they were formerly enslaved, who came there in order to become soldiers, to fight for their freedom and to fight for the Union, for the preservation of the Union. And the pride that welled up in my soul when I heard that story, that my ancestors went in one door as an escaped slave and came out of another door with authorization to join the United States Army. And so that's why for us, it's crucial to tell the truth right there in front of that courthouse with a marker, as well as with a statue of a Black soldier that will stand there, because representation matters. And only one side or one people group has been represented since 1899. And so now is the time. It's been past time, but now is the time. And it was Maya Angelou who said that we in this generation of African Americans, we are the dream and the hope of the slave. And so for me to be able to participate in something like this, to me, it's sacrosanct. To me, it's holy. To me, it's righteous. It's good that I can not only tell the truth so that people from all over our ever-growing diverse city of Franklin can learn, but also they can look with their own eyes and see a soldier, a Black man, a representation of a Black man. And as we're going to do it, he's not going to be up, 30 feet high. His base will be about a foot tall, and he'll be, average of 5.5, 6 feet. So people will be able to see him and see his dignity and see his value, see his worth, see the stripes on his sleeves, see the cuts in his pants, the texture in his face. So again, we're hoping that knowledge is going to bring power, freedom, deliverance, and a change, which is why, again, people fought hard to not want us to do this. But again, I'm glad that the board of mayor and aldermen got behind us 100%, and many people in the community. So it's going to be a great day. And so no, it's not a romantic kind of thing because everybody's not feeling this, but it's a powerful thing. And when it is dedicated next year, man, it's going to be glorious. And it's going to also represent many of the African-American families in our community that haven't had a voice, people who that I'm standing on their shoulders, the refugee family, the Reddick family, the Carruthers families, all of the Murdoch family, all these Black families in our community who have been holding it down, dealing with segregation, as Hewitt spoke about, that this is going to be a glorious time for them as well to see this, that, Hewitt hadn't told the story, but there was no need for him to come downtown and be in the presence of that statue as a young man growing up in Franklin. And it wasn't until we got the clearance from the city that we could put the markers up that Hewitt was able to actually go out to that mount and stand there next to that statue for the first time. Because now there was a different significance happening and going on. There was representation that was about to happen. So again, that revelation is going to help all who have an open heart to learn.
Thank you. We have a comment and a question. Dr. Bill Frist, the former senator, says, thanks to the panel for teaching us so much. He left it on our YouTube channel, so thank you, gentlemen, for this. And then we have a question from Matt Largen, who is the CEO of Williamson, Inc. Have there been conversations about including information on new markers as part of a curriculum with local schools as students study Franklin's role in the Civil War?
There have been some very informal conversations, but 2020 has obviously been just a crazy year, just everything, especially schools. And I know that Williamson County is going through some real serious and thorough, comprehensive, a series of meetings and conversations about race and about history, about slavery. So I would love for some of this to be included so that children aren't just, for example, coming to Carter House in Carnton and learning about the battle and learning about slavery on kind of a periphery level, but that they can literally drive through the square and see the markers, see both monuments, quite honestly. And, you know, as they say, let the reader decide. Or if they have time to stop, I really think there's a lot of wonderful opportunities. And every single day, people who read those markers are learning something every single day that just over a year ago they couldn't learn or had not been told to them. So I just think there's a lot of them.
I had a publisher to contact me about a book that they wanted to have the school system to take a look at, that they wanted to use as a textbook for the school system.
Thank you for including that. Pastor Kevin, I was wanting to go back to one of the things that you started to talk about, and that is just the challenges that you face. You've got now another challenge, which is actually getting the statue up. You have the money, you have the artist. What are the kind of conversations that are being had that you are excited about and that you're also concerned about?
Well, I'm excited about the support that we received, and even during the criticism was mild as far as number wise, as compared to the people who were supportive. You know, the challenge early on, just to be quite honest, our church works in an African American community here, and when I started sharing this with the people in that community, and it's a lower income community, from the African American community, they were like, well, Pastor, yeah, that sounds good, but it's never going to happen. We're not going to, you know, so there was a hesitancy to get involved. But at the last board meeting where the aldermen voted to do this unanimously, the room was packed full, standing room only, and the majority of the people who were in that room wearing T-shirts that we had made were the people from that community who had told me that it's not going to happen, and now it was happening. And so that was a challenge, but then it was also a good thing. That was a highlight for me to see the community, that particular community, being there inside the courthouse or inside the city hall, watching that meeting and cheering when people voted, when they voted to do it. And so there was like, wow, you really can make a difference. You really can do something. So that was a challenge. To be quite honest, there's a little bit of nerves within me with the recent situation with over the summer, the protesting and all of that, and the murders of African American men and women that we saw over the summer, and then this huge there was this cry of people wanting to go down and just tear down the monument, and I was like, you know, don't let that happen. If you want to, as Chris said, if you want to move the monument, there's a proper way to go about it. It's an uphill battle, but there's a proper way to go about it. But what you're going to do now is if you try to get that monument removed, then they're going to want to remove the colored troop statue before it's even up, you know, and that tells another story that is so that so needs to be told. So one of the you asked Eric what he said that kind of changed our minds, because I was really on the lines of this thing needs to go, the monument needs to go, but Eric explaining to me that, you know, this is just a general Confederate soldier, it's not a particular individual. That took me a long time to get over, but that was kind of the seed that was planted to help me get over this. That this is just and it could have been a poor farmer who may or may not wanted to fight, but was forced to fight, and all of that. But then also hearing the story of the slave market actually being on that same piece of property that the monument is on. And so I told the leaders of the city in one of our meetings that people think that ground is holy, but it's holy not because Chip is there. It's holy because men, women, boys, and girls, human beings were sold like cattle there. That's what makes that middle ground of the city holy. And so, that marker that talks about that being a slave market, man, that's got to go there, and it's got to go right there where it actually happened. And to me, as a white person, when I read that, it's shock value. It's not like I didn't know that. I didn't know it was there. It's not like I didn't know human beings were bought and sold, but reading it and thinking, where I'm standing right now, this is what took place. And so that center of the square is holy because of that, not because of of the monument. And so hearing that story and thinking that story has got to be told, and then coming to grips with, okay, this is Chip, it's not General Lee, it's not somebody like that. That helps. But I think, again, because of some of the things that happened this summer, there's been this renewed effort to maybe want to do something a little more drastic, and at times that gets a little. I get a little uncomfortable hearing that. It's like, okay, we got this plan in place that we think is better and that we think is healing and edifying. Let's try that. Let's see this plan to fruition and see what happens. And as Chris said, our children or our grandchildren or our great grandchildren, they may have a different idea, and the timing may be a little bit better then. But right now, we've got a good plan, and in spite of the challenges, the support that we received has been unreal. And there have been 2 cities in Tennessee that the aldermen or the commissioners from those cities have called me, and we've had initial conversations, but then nothing has come of it yet about what they're wanting to do in their it's just a matter of time, I think. But one of the issues is, in a lot of those other cities, their monuments downtown are particular people, and not a generic soldier. And that's where we were fortunate, I think. It was easier for me to let go of the idea of moving the monument, because that's just a generic soldier representing all the Confederates dead instead of a particular person.
Thank you. We've got another question, and I'm going to give this one to Pastor Hewitt, and then if anybody else wants to jump in, feel free. This one is from Cyril Stewart, and it says, you've each talked about learning and discovering the fuller story, but beyond the markers and statues, what needs to happen for many, many others to learn and have conversations about this?
I think the important thing for us right through here is this. What was important for us was to begin to have conversations. I believe that more people need to be going down to the square. They need to be looking at these markers and reading them. Parents need to be taking their children. They need to be taking them around the square, letting them look at these markers. There needs to be some family time where they discuss what's on the markers. There's nothing like having some parent-children discussion. Education is the best thing that can happen. I'm even at the point, someone asked the question about, is anything being done about this being put in schools as part of the curriculum? Matter of fact, I believe that we ought to be urging our school boards, if it's not currently part of the curriculum, I think we ought to be urging this to be part of the curriculum in our schools. When my grandson is out of high school and middle school and all of that now, but a few years ago, it was a time to take your grandparent to school with you. I was blown away when I went to Winstead Elementary with my grandson. And I began to tell those parents, now get this, these were parents as well as those children. And I told them about segregated schools because the question that was asked, how is school different for me, different than it is for them now? And I told them about segregated schools and how segregation was different. Do you know that the kids kind of laughed, but all of the parents after that little session came up to me. They said, "Did you make up that story?" They had absolutely no idea that I was telling the truth. And these were parents. We do need to get some of this information in schools. They need to be talking to their children. So what happens after? I believe we need to have some talking in our homes, some teaching between parents and children, and we need to urge our school board people to try to get some of this in their curriculums.
One of the things I'd be curious to hear about all of you is how have you stuck together? We've talked about the fact that you've had this summer of racial reckoning. There's been a lot of tension, and you've managed to use words like compromise. You've talked about the history behind it. What is the secret for other groups? They often talk about storming, norming, and forming. How do you keep that focus to continue doing what you're doing?
I'll jump in there. I think for me, and I think this is important, is that at least Pastor Hewitt, Pastor Chris, and I, we already had a relationship, and we had already had some discussions on these things, and I consider both of them dear friends, and so I don't think there would really be anything that would that could interfere with that. And so when I feel like that they have my back, and I think they know that I've got their back. If any of these things happen, Eric is kind of the new kid on the block, but I'll tell people of the four of us, Eric's the best preacher among us, and and the way that he could tell a story and hold your attention. And so I consider Eric now to be a dear friend, and I would go to battle for him. Early on in the conversation, and this is just me, but early on in the conversation, I told the city leaders, and this may sound a little bit arrogant. I don't mean for it to sound that way, but I tried to make people understand that, look, if Chris and Hewitt tell me that the statue needs to come down, then I'm going to war with them about that. If they say, no, this is a good plan, this is a better way of doing it, then I'm going that way with them as well. It was what, and it wasn't what I wanted to do with it that was important. It was, what do the people who are most affected? So what does the African American community want? And then now, how can I, work out my own salvation, so to speak? Now, I did grow up in the South. I am from Nashville, not Franklin, but I am from Nashville, and so I grew up that not much was said about the Civil War in school. But when it was said, it was state rights, and it's plantation, and the slaves for the most part had it good. Sure, there were some bad slave owners, but most of them, they treated their slaves with dignity, which is a contradiction of terms, just in and of itself. But I think over the summer, because of social distance, we may not have gotten together as much as we were in the beginning. But I know that I can pick up the phone and call either one of these guys, and they would be with me. They would drop what they're doing and help me in any way that I needed them to, and I would do the same for them.
And I'll jump on that. The relationships are real, and this was not our first rodeo. There were many things that we had done together over the years with our churches. So when we got involved in this, again, I'm with familiar people, and we've been doing all kinds of works of justice and reconciliation for years. And so I'm always appreciative of the fact that Kevin and Eric intentionally included Black leaders at the beginning stage of this, that we all built it together, that we weren't invited as an afterthought or for a photo opportunity to make it look politically correct, but we were brought in early on. And so to any community around the country, especially in the South, that they're grappling with what to do, that I would just say that in the early stages, the embryonic stages, it must be diverse from the beginning. It must be inclusive from the beginning. And so that will mean for white people to let go of power, to let go of having to feel like they have to be the ones who lead it and make all the decisions, or bring Black people on later for cursory input and so forth. So I think that's one of the reasons this has been successful, is that people realize this has never been about tokenism. This has truly been a partnership. And again, getting to know Eric during this time, man, I love this man. He's one of my brothers. And again, I champion what he has been doing. They're educating people in our community and reclaiming land concerning the Battle of Franklin. So we all felt at different times that we were being carried on eagle's wings, that God was carrying us through this, and that we felt humbled to be selected to do something so significant. So there would be moments where we would be talking and we would just all of a sudden reach agreement. And it would just be that way. Or we would see provision. You know, donors would give the money for us to get the markers. Donors gave the money for us to get the statue. So we would see provision throughout the whole thing, support from the city, people wanting this, cheering us on. Not everybody, as we've said, but many people. So we feel like we're caught up in a moment in time that is historical and significant for this community.
Any other thoughts on that, Pastor Hewitt or Eric?
Yeah, I'd like to say along the same lines that they're mentioning there, it's a thing of respect. I respect these brothers, all of them. And it's not a thing that I have to go in and demand it. They show respect to me and I show respect to them. I know I can count on them. They know they can count on me. And I think that's something that any group that's going to do anything that is effective, they're going to have to show that to one another. Chris hit a very important thing right on the nail head. That is that don't let your working arrangement be a second thought. If you're going to have an effective group, everybody has to be somebody in the group. It can't be an afterthought. As long as you have that, you're going to be okay. So I think that's a good situation, and it'll work and it'll stay working if you have that kind of relationship.
Thank you. And Eric, would you share your perspective, being that you are, as the pastor said, among the newest here, the new brother, so to speak? What do you think about all this? Oop, you're still on mute. You're on mute.
I think I should just stay off mute. I feel much the same. I mean, when I called Kevin or reached out to Kevin the day after the prayer meeting, I had no idea that, you know, we would get to this point, that we would develop this friendship, which I'm certain will last beyond the conclusion of the fuller story, because there's more to tell. It may not be in the square, but it's in Franklin. It's with people. It's talking to them. The one thing that I think is important to point out is, so what's the title of this? The Confederate Reckoning. So it's actually that exact word, reckoning, is something that I've been talking about with my staff, my board, and the visitors for years, that we are really reckoning with the Confederacy. And at the core of that reckoning is the Confederate government, the construct, was built on the pillars of slavery. Its constitution did not allow slavery to be abolished. Various states like Alabama that joined the Confederacy would not allow slavery to be abolished. This institution was meant to exist indefinitely. And there was a president of the United States and hundreds of thousands of men from all over the North who believed that the United States of America was worth defending. And at the midpoint of the war, when Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation and allowed black men to serve, and they started to stream into Franklin from the rural areas of Williamson County, when they were not citizens, when they were still legally slaves, they opted to fight for their own freedom, but for the United States of America. And for the life of me, as someone who has worked in this field for years, the idea that somehow the United States of America is in any way the bad guy in this equation is something we have got to get over. Because this reckoning was a rebellion built on the pillars of slavery. And those who led the secession movement were unequivocal about it. And ironically, that's all the more reason I think the Confederate monument must remain. Because it allows us to better understand not just who those men were, soldiers, but what the Confederacy was. And we should not forget it, because if it is erased, then the casual person doesn't really understand. And we can't forget that. But we also can't forget that we live in the United States of America. And in this country, there were monuments put up all over to the side that lost the war. That's what we're reckoning with. Confederacy, race, what was really at stake. And here we are, almost 160 years after the war. I think it's okay. I think I said to Chris at one point, I'm sure, maybe I said it to Hewitt, I feel no guilt. I'm not one of those people who walks around saying I'm sorry for everything. I said, I didn't do any of this. I didn't own slaves. I didn't live back then. But I am guilty if I perpetuate the old myths of the past. And it is time to just be honest about what the Confederacy was and what it stood for. And that doesn't mean that all the monuments and everything have to go, but it's time to tell that fuller story. And the fuller story, there are some people that don't want that story told, because then it puts their idyllic perception of the old South and the antebellum South, beautiful old homes and Confederate monuments in a whole different light. And folks, that's exactly what we've got to punch through. Because if we don't, then in the end, that history will be lost. Because 20, 30, 40 years from now, our kids and grandkids, they've got knowledge in their hand. They can tap right into it. They don't have to go to a library. You can't fool them anymore. Time to tell the truth. Just be honest. But I'm thrilled and humbled and privileged to have met these three men. So I'm proud to be part of it.
Thank you so much. And thanks to all of you for tuning in tonight. Thank you to our panelists, Eric Jacobson, Reverend Riggs, Reverend Hewitt, and Reverend Chris Williamson. The Confederate Reckoning 2.0, we launched that today with the USA Today Network South Region. And the focus is on education and how Confederate history has been taught in schools throughout the South, and who's leading those children through the lessons in the classrooms.
Again, we want to thank our panelists one more time and thank the audience members who asked their questions and their comments. And hopefully you'll take a chance, as you were invited to do, to go to the town square in Franklin and read those markers there. Everyone have a wonderful evening and stay safe and healthy.